Questions without notice. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr President. And my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Today, the COVID-19 crisis continues to grow. 345 new cases have been reported in New South Wales, with 93 deaths resulting from the current New South Wales outbreak. Does Mr Morrison now regret pressuring the New South Wales Premier to avoid a hard and fast lockdown?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank the Senator for her question and indeed acknowledge it continues to be a very challenging day for people across many different parts of Australia, as it is for people across many different parts of the world. I reject the assertion made by the Senator in terms of pressuring. It is well known that throughout the management of the COVID pandemic, New South Wales had shown an extraordinary capacity in terms of their testing, COVID tracing and isolating regime to be able to get on top of multiple outbreaks through that time. Clearly, as is publicly acknowledged and as the Prime Minister has publicly acknowledged, the Delta variant has created an additional challenge for systems and in relation to the increased rate of transmissibility that comes with the Delta variant. Indeed, it's estimated the Delta variant results in a 100% increase in relation to transmission. And with those changed circumstances, so too, as we've had to right throughout the pandemic, the advice and the approach changes appropriately too. The advice and the approach changes appropriately too.
Order.
We want to see the New South Wales lockdown succeed. We want to see New South Wales get on top of it. It is why, as a government, we've been offering additional resources and assistance along the way to New South Wales, be that in the form of additional contact tracing support or additional support in relation to enforcement of the lockdown through the supply of Australian Defence Force personnel to work alongside of New South Wales Police. We'll continue to deliver the support we can to assist New South Wales.
Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
In New South Wales, in addition to Dubbo, towns with very high Aboriginal populations like Walgett, Bourke and Brewarrina have today been plunged into lockdown. Does Mr Morrison regret that, despite promising First Nations Australians that they would be a priority in the vaccine rollout, only 10% have been vaccinated more than 18 months into the pandemic?
Order. I'm going to insist. Order on my right. I need to hear the question. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, indeed, the government is acutely aware of the reality of different regional communities facing lockdown and cases of COVID-19. As we've been aware in terms of communities with higher rates of Indigenous populations, of the consequences such as when the Northern Territory has faced lockdown conditions as well. Where possible, we deploy additional support and resources in relation to those communities. The Senator asked a question about vaccine availability and prioritisation. As is being well canvassed, vaccine availability has been a challenge at times. However, I'd note that in terms of some of those cohorts who have been amongst the first eligible to receive a vaccine, we have seen in many of those cohorts them undertake that activity of their own volition in numbers that have achieved very high uptake. And I urge all those who are in cohorts that may not have achieved such high uptake to seize every opportunity.
Order, Senator Birmingham. Senator O'Neill, a final supplementary question.
While Melbourne's in lockdown, Sydney and large parts of New South Wales are in lockdown, Canberra is going into lockdown, Coalition MP Mr Christensen is saying, and I quote, "We need to end all of these ridiculous zero-risk, anti-freedom, anti-privacy pandemic restrictions right now." Does Mr Morrison regret putting his political interest ahead of the health of Australians by refusing to rein in Mr Christensen?
Again, on my right, I need to hear the question. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, the government has made clear, both in the other chamber and in this place, views in relation to the comments made by Mr Christensen. The approach of the government is clearly to make sure that we emphasise to Australians the importance of abiding by public health orders, by restrictions in place, following advice in all circumstances, and that includes advice in relation to the vaccination rollout as well. It's been deeply frustrating at times that different things have indeed hurt public confidence in the vaccination rollout. I've noted Professor Dorr from the Kirby Institute's remarks that we will look back on anti-AstraZenecanism as one of the greatest public health failings in many years, and whilst the health advice has ebbed and flowed, if you like, in relation to AZ, it's certainly been disappointing that some have exacerbated that
Senator
in
Birmingham.
more extreme
Time
ways.
for the answer has expired. Order. Senator Van.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Can the Minister advise the Senate how the Australian response to the COVID-19 pandemic, from our frontline and essential workers to our small businesses and farmers, is helping Australia address the ongoing challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, from the very start of the COVID-19 pandemic, indeed before the World Health Organisation declared it to be a pandemic, we have had frontline workers, be they those working on our borders, in our health systems, or indeed the many scientists and others that we rely upon for advice and information, doing an incredible job in the service of our country. And it is the work of all of those that has enabled governments across this country to achieve world-leading outcomes in terms of protecting Australians, keeping people safe and achieving outcomes in the saving of lives that are far in excess of the tragic, terrible circumstances we've seen in so much of the rest of the world. Mr President, many of those are today engaged in activities across the country in helping with testing, in helping with contact tracing, or in helping with the vaccination rollout. And we extend our thanks to all of them for all that they are doing in helping the country. We extend our thanks to the many essential workers in food, manufacturing, production, distribution and other industries that have been so important, as well as the other care sectors who have had to step up at times when restrictions have been imposed on so many other activities. I want to acknowledge the many Australians continuing to turn out in record numbers to get vaccinated. We have seen in the last 24 hours 262,314 vaccines administered across Australia. This, once again, Mr President, is another daily record. To administer those vaccines, we have many GP clinics opening late at night, additional hours, alongside increasing numbers of pharmacies, putting in extra hours alongside those working in state clinics or seeking to get into specialist centres, aged care, remote populations or otherwise. It's a huge effort by those individuals in the largest peacetime logistical undertaking our nation has seen.
Expired. Senator Van, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how is the health response by Australians, including through the vaccination rollout, providing the foundation for us to chart our way back from COVID-19?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, with the record number of doses administered in the last 24 hours, we now see close to 14.5 million doses administered across Australia. Our country is administering vaccines to the tune of being able to provide a jab to the entire population of Adelaide every single week. It has been a huge scale-up, as I indicated before, and in doing so we've seen some of the most important cohorts who had primary access turn out in record numbers, taking responsibility for themselves in doing so, but responding to that call. Those 70-plus Australians, those aged over 70, some 82.2% of them have now received their first dose. 49.9% have now received their second dose of vaccine amongst those aged over 70. Of the entire eligible population aged over 16, some 46% of all Australians have now received at least that first dose.
Senator Van, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how has the Liberal and Nationals government's economic plan supported Australian jobs and businesses through the pandemic?
Senator Birmingham.
We've always been very conscious of the reality that responding to COVID-19 has been about saving both lives and livelihoods. And despite the many difficulties and uncertainties that Australia and the rest of the world have faced, we've continued to outperform the rest of the world in terms of saving the lives of Australians, in terms of saving the jobs of Australians, the businesses of Australians and the fundamentals that will enable Australia to come out of this pandemic more strongly than so many other nations who have been affected so much worse. Prior to the recent challenges of additional lockdowns across the country, we saw unemployment having dipped below 5% to 4.9%. A comeback in terms of unemployment far exceeding expectations and the strong jobs growth, putting Australia in a position of seeing employment at levels in excess of pre-pandemic. Our economic responses have helped achieve these outcomes, and we continue to deliver record support to families, households and businesses to get them through this.
Senator Ayres.
My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie. When asked about Mr Christensen's disinformation, Mr Morrison's Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, said, and I quote, "If you start prodding the bear, you're going to make the situation worse for us as a government, not better." What does Mr Morrison's Deputy Prime Minister mean?
The Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. I thank the senator for his question. I listened to Barnaby Joyce's interview, as so many Australians did, on RN yesterday, where this question was canvassed, and he was very clear that he does not go to Mr Christensen for advice on how to protect his family and his community around COVID. He does not agree with George Christensen's views on lockdowns, masks and other things. But what he does do is absolutely support Mr Christensen's right as a citizen of a free country and as a community member to have an opinion and to express it. Now, we've seen numerous times in this place individuals take to Facebook, take to public platforms to express views which we don't agree with, whether it's supporting criminals like those to my right, the Greens.
Senator Wong on a point of order.
Mr President, the direct relevance. Senator Ayres' question was to ask the person who represents Mr Joyce in this chamber what, a direct quote, "If you start prodding the bear, you're going to make the situation worse for us as a government," what he meant.
So on the point of order, it is quite a broad question, but in my view it does need to be restricted to meanings or potential meanings or imputations of that particular comment rather than observations on others to be directly relevant. But it is very broad, I must say, in that sense. So I call Senator Mackenzie to continue.
Thank you. And as I was saying, people in this place, on their Facebook pages, on the floor of this chamber and in public.
Order. Senator Wong on the point of order. I can probably guess it.
The Minister, Mr President, she can't just ignore your ruling.
I'm going to ask Senator Mackenzie that I did say that observations on others I didn't think were in order when the question was what does the Deputy Prime Minister mean. That is a broad question, but I do believe that it needs to be limited to meanings, potential meanings or otherwise of that statement rather than observations upon others. Senator Mackenzie.
As to, I think what, if I could paraphrase what I think the Deputy Prime Minister was talking about, was reflecting on Mr Christensen's comments in the chamber and clearly articulating that he didn't support them, that he supported following the medical advice, and he himself is also following the health advice right now as he is in lockdown in Armidale, New South Wales, as a result of a state health order in that state. So Barnaby Joyce, as the Deputy Prime Minister, has been clarified those comments. He doesn't agree with
Senator
George
McKenzie,
Christensen,
time
but he
for the
agrees with
answer
his right
has
to say
expired.
it.
Senator Ayres, a supplementary question.
The Deputy Prime Minister has also said, and I quote, and I'll say that to my colleagues, I can assure you that when you've got a thin margin, don't start giving reasons for a by-election. Did Mr Morrison's Deputy Prime Minister give that advice to the Prime Minister?
Senator McKenzie.
Well, I'm obviously not privy to every conversation that the Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister have, and nor should I be. So I'll have to take that on notice.
Senator Ayres, a final supplementary question.
Why does Mr Morrison continue to prioritise protecting his own job over protecting the jobs and lives of ordinary Australians? When will he finally take responsibility and stand up to the extreme elements of his own party room who are spreading dangerous misinformation?
Senator McKenzie.
Well, I completely reject the premise of Senator Ayres' question. How absolutely ridiculous. The Prime Minister, our government, and I would have hoped the entire parliament here in Canberra's one focus for the last 18 months should be assisting Australians to get through this global pandemic together, making sure we encourage people to get vaccinated. Even AstraZeneca. We've got a chief medical officer in Queensland who can't even say the word AstraZeneca, where there is no vaccination shortage if you're going to actually choose to that particular vaccination. Working with states and territories. We've got millions of Australians right down in lockdown, and they're not able to get to work. It is our government that is actually supporting them with individual disaster payments should they lose hours of work. It is our government, in partnership with both Liberal and Labor state governments, supporting those small businesses who are subject to lockdown. So
Order,
that when
Senator McKenzie. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question's to the Leader of the Government representing the Prime Minister. The IPCC report released this week was the Code Red for Humanity. We are on track to tip over 1.5 degrees of warming this decade unless we drastically change course. The Morrison government has nowhere left to hide, and you've even been singled out by the US government for not lifting your targets. Will you lift Australia's 2030 targets, or will you keep us in the sole company of petro-states Russia and Saudi Arabia?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Waters for her question and the opportunity indeed to talk about Australia's targets, our commitment as a country to meeting our targets, our delivery as a country and exceeding our targets, and our determination to maintain that sort of track record in relation to Australia's emissions reduction targets. Because as a country we should, contrary to what comes from those in that corner or indeed the misinformation from those opposite, we should hold our head high about the fact that as a nation, when we've made commitments to the world about our emissions reduction targets, we've delivered on those commitments and we've exceeded those commitments. And that's been a constant pattern for Australia. In terms of our Paris targets, our commitment is also to be able to meet and to exceed those targets. That's our determination in relation to what we're doing, building off the fact that since 2005 Australia has seen a 20% reduction in our emissions. That's been faster than Canada at 1%, Japan at 10%, New Zealand at 4%, the US at 13%. As I've said before in this chamber, I don't mention that as a criticism of those places, but simply to put into perspective what Australia has been able to achieve. It's been done with transformation across Australia in terms of Australian industry transforming, the energy generation mix transforming, and of course Australian households transforming their behaviour as well. That's seen, for example, in 2020 some 7 gigawatts of renewable energy generation capacity installed in Australia in 2020 alone. That's at a rate around 8 times faster than New Zealand or Japan or Italy. It's around 3 times faster than in Germany, the US, China or the EU. And indeed 1 in 4 Australian households now have rooftop solar, showing that rate of transition that Australians are helping to make.
Senator Birmingham. Senator Ward has a supplementary question.
Thanks, President. The US Deputy Climate Envoy said overnight that Australians' targets are, quote, not sufficient and that we should be considering at least 50% by 2030. That is an unprecedented public rebuke. You copied the US target in 2015, albeit giving yourself 5 extra years to meet it. Will you now copy the US and double Australia's 2030 targets?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, we're going to get on with ensuring that we don't just talk about targets, but in exceeding those targets, we do it by investing in the technologies to actually reduce emissions, to achieve the outcomes that reduce emissions. Australia generates around 1% of global emissions. It's important that we do our part. But it's even more important in terms of achieving a reduction in global emissions that we help to achieve the breakthroughs in technology and the transformations that mean we are acting in concert with other nations, like the United States, but also like China or India or other nations who have higher emissions profiles than Australia. Our intention is to make sure that we deliver on the $20 billion of low emissions technologies commitments we've made for the decade ahead. That's part of building on our partnerships we've signed with Singapore, Japan, Germany, the UK to deliver the technologies that will help the US, Australia and many other partner nations and others around the world to reduce our emissions.
Senator Waters, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, President. The Deputy Prime Minister yesterday on ABC Radio called on someone to do a plan to reach net zero. Putting aside the fact that he has been in government for 7 years, have any departments been instructed by any ministers to do any planning for this crucial life-saving work of a plan to reach net zero?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. The answer to that is absolutely. Absolutely they have. That's precisely what our technology investment roadmap is all about, getting the breakthroughs in technology to enable us to be able to achieve emissions reductions, to enable us to chart that course to net zero, to enable us to do it in ways that maintain Australia's competitiveness, maintain the employment and opportunities for jobs for Australians, maintain position for Australian businesses. That roadmap outlines the work that we are pursuing, our target to achieve clean hydrogen of under $2 per kilogram, our targets to achieve energy storage at under $100 per megawatt hour, our target to achieve carbon capture and storage at under $20 per tonne of CO2, our target to achieve low-carbon steel of under $900 per tonne or low-carbon aluminium of under $2,700 per tonne, our target to be able to measure and achieve soil carbon improvements at under $3 per hectare. Getting those targets achieved is how you make transformation here and abroad.
The answer has expired. Senator Sheldon.
Good, thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. In defending his own disinformation campaign, Senator Canavan has declared today that throughout the pandemic there has not been, and I quote, even a scintilla of parliamentary accountability. Does this minister agree with Canavan when he says that the Morrison-Joyce government has been completely unaccountable through the pandemic?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
No, Senator, I don't agree, because you're taking the comments quite significantly out of context. I was sitting in the chamber when Senator Canavan was making those comments. I was sitting in the chamber, and I know full well that in making those comments, Senator Canavan was challenging public health orders issued by states and territories that are made by regulation, by edict, without reference to their parliaments. Now, it's up for each of those state and territories to defend their positions, and indeed I know many of them have probably in cases, of course, presented in parliamentary committees or other formats. But in terms of the Morrison government, we've made sure we're here today answering your questions. We've made sure through the establishment of the COVID Select Committee that we have fronted up. Countless times our officials have fronted up to answer the questions of the opposition, to answer other questions, to submit ourselves to the scrutiny of this parliament and of the processes and procedures, as is only reasonable, Mr President. We front up, we handle that scrutiny, we submit ourselves to it. That's exactly what we're doing right now. But contorting or twisting words out of context pitching them in terms of pretending somehow that this parliament hasn't had scrutiny, hasn't had opportunity to do so. That's just not true. This parliament has. I don't believe that's what Senator Canavan was suggesting in his remarks. I believe he was making references to other decisions elsewhere. That's for him to defend, for others to engage in. But Senator, I think you are misleading in terms of the construct of the question that you have put. We are here, engaged in the scrutiny and accountability. I'm sure you, Senator Sheldon, have pursued the opportunities at estimates and otherwise to hold the government to accountable, and I've got no doubt that all of you, in particular Senator Gallagher as chair of the Select Committee, will continue to do so throughout the course of the pandemic.
Senator Sheldon, a supplementary question.
Senator Canavan has defended himself, saying spreading disinformation is, and I quote, speaking about a particular viewpoint that is our job. Does Mr Morrison agree?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, I didn't quite catch the quote that was referenced then. I mean, it is the job of members and senators to indeed bring perspectives to this parliament from their communities, on behalf of their communities, and to do that. I urge, the government urges, everyone to do that in the most responsible way possible. We don't control the words that come out of the mouths of every member or senator, but I urge them to do so in the most responsible way possible. I urge all of those who engage in public discourse across this country to engage in it in the most responsible way possible. I referenced concern about the vaccine rollout in an earlier response and the fact that we've seen this anti-AstraZeneca mythology built up by some, led, sadly, by even some public health officials, such as the incoming Governor of Queensland. That's disappointing that we've seen those sorts of mistakes in terms of the language used by others made, and I'd urge them all to make sure they apply temperate, thoughtful.
Senator Sheldon, a final supplementary question.
And one of Mr Morrison's own cabinet ministers told Nikki Savva that Mr Morrison's philosophy is, and I quote, if you see a problem, throw money at it. If you see a problem, walk away from it. If you see a problem, duck shove to somebody else. Isn't the dangerous disinformation campaign being run from his own party room just another problem Mr Morrison is walking away from?
Order. Order. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, I reject the premise behind that question. I reject the assertion in Ms Savva's article, and of course, having a question from a member of the opposition about throwing money at a problem is really, of course, quite an astounding proposition. Quite an astounding proposition that those opposite would decide to hone in on an anonymous quote and suggest that somehow throwing money at a problem is a bad thing. Well, Mr President, those opposite know no other solution to most problems than to throw money at it. Of course, whilst pretending to take a bipartisan approach to issues in the pandemic, they've also been none too shy in terms of saying that the government should not bring JobKeeper to an end, but then criticising the spending on JobKeeper. They've come out with policies such as last week's thought bubble around the $300 payments to all Australians, including the millions who have already been vaccinated. And of course we know they want to talk about cabinet process. That one didn't even go through the shadow cabinet process. It was a surprise to Mr Butler. The shadow health minister of all people didn't even know about it.
Answer has expired. I will now then move to Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister advise the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government economic plan is supporting workers and businesses to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and get to the other side?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. I do acknowledge that One Nation did have the call.
Yes, but they're...
My understanding is Senator
apologies.
Hanson had the call.
Sorry. I will go then to them next. I had Senator Roberts on the list provided to me, so I didn't see you, Senator Hanson. I will come to you next. It'll just be a switch. I wasn't advised of the change and I didn't see you trying to get my attention. My apologies. So if I'll go to this question, then I'll do that question next. That'll just be an easy switch. Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. And I thank Senator Hughes for the question. And in particular, I acknowledge Senator Hughes' work that she's done in relation to ensuring that regional businesses and rural businesses in Australia are supported throughout COVID-19. Mr President, as I think we would all acknowledge, small and family business are well and truly the lifeblood of the Australian economy, but in particular our communities and our rural and regional communities. And these businesses have been and are the key to Australia's recovery from COVID-19. And without a doubt, those small businesses will be the key to our future economic success. Mr President, when we look at what has happened in the ACT today, small businesses have not had it easy throughout COVID-19. They have faced many challenges with lockdowns and restrictions severely impacting their operations. But, Mr President, any of us who have dealt with a small business, we know that they have faced up to those challenges and they are doing their best to get through COVID-19. And the Morrison government is backing them every step of the way. In terms of the support that we have been able to provide small businesses, it's around $300 billion in direct health and economic support since the pandemic began has reached our shores to support these businesses, to support the essential workers, but also to keep Australians in jobs throughout the pandemic. This extensive economic support, and this obviously includes JobKeeper, the apprentices' wage subsidy and that important cash flow boost, giving back to small businesses what they themselves have actually earned. That saw Australians' unemployment rate come down to a record low of 4.9%. Mr President, the Morrison government, we will continue to back small businesses every step of the way, because we know they're doing it tough, but we want them to prosper and grow and create more jobs.
Senator Hughes, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how is the government supporting businesses and protecting jobs through the current lockdowns and restrictions resulting from the pandemic?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, as the outbreaks that we are currently seeing illustrate, Australia and Australians, we're not out of the woods yet. The Morrison government, we continue to work with the states and the territories to help their businesses and to support their staff that are impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, in partnership with the South Australian government, we've provided a $40 million support package for around 20,000 businesses in South Australia. In July, we reached agreement with the Victorian government, and we are providing around $200 million to help support Victorian small and medium businesses. And in New South Wales, we have an agreement with the New South Wales government where businesses with a turnover of up to $250 million who've lost 30% or more of turnover or have just seen a decline of 30% or more in turnover, they'll be eligible for payments of up to $100,000 per week. Again, we are providing the economic support, working with states and territories to help these businesses.
A final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, whilst those opposite are clearly supporting the airlines by fleeing lockdown as quick as possible and not sharing it with Canberra, how can every single Australian help small and family businesses and their workers to not only get through the current challenges but ensure our economic recovery from COVID-19?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, I think we all acknowledge in this place that everybody's personal circumstances are just that, their own personal circumstances. And certainly we also all know that in relation to small businesses, the best thing that we can do at this point in time is to assist them by getting vaccinated. The Prime Minister, alongside the states and territories, have worked to develop our four-phase plan to see us through COVID-19 and to get us out the other side. As more and more Australians get vaccinated, and it is pleasing to see that the vaccination rates in Australia, they are accelerating. It took us, I think, 6 days to get from 13 million to 14 million. What we are doing there is we are protecting Australians against the virus. Getting vaccinated, as we all know, it protects you, it protects your family and it protects your community. We want to see small and family businesses in particular prosper and grow, and one of the things we can do collectively is get
Senator
vaccinated.
Cash, time for the Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Hanson, once again, my apologies. We'll come to you now.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is on behalf of Senator Roberts, and it's for Senator Colbeck, representing the Minister for Health. Despite having over 63% of Israel's population vaccinated for both Pfizer doses, on Monday, Israel recorded 3,372 new COVID cases, up from less than 300 a little over a month ago, an 11-fold surge. The effect of COVID vaccinations may be wearing off, with studies in Israel on the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccinations showing it is only 39% effective. Pfizer recently admitted that immunity from its 2-dose vaccine is waning and will seek FDA authorisation for a third booster dose. Randomised control trials show no evidence of the provisionally approved vaccines having any prolonged efficiency. Minister, do you agree or acknowledge these facts? If not, then what is the vaccine efficiency?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks Senator Hanson for the question. My apologies. Mr. President, the concept of requirement of booster vaccines is something that the government has had as a part of its strategy for a considerable period of time. As you would be aware, the Moderna vaccines that have recently been approved, a proportion of those are under consideration for utilisation as booster doses. The fact that this is a new virus, the vaccines for the virus are new, the concept of the life of the vaccine and the period that antibodies were retained in the human body was always a question. So, Mr. President, the concept of a booster vaccine has always been something that we've been considering. And we have plentiful supplies in our vaccine supply strategy for that. As we see the evidence that comes from these other jurisdictions that have higher vaccination rates and have vaccinated before us, we will clearly consider that information, and we will incorporate the learnings from that into our mechanisms for the completion of the continuation of the vaccination rollout, whether that be the Moderna dose or whether that be a variant of the vaccines that are being proposed, considered and developed by a number of other vaccine manufacturers, Mr. President. So the concept of requiring a booster vaccine is not a new one. It's something the government has always been considering. It sits already as a part of our considerations. And of course, Mr. President, once we get to the stage of understanding that better through the evidence that we are receiving from other jurisdictions around the world, the requirements for that, the operation for that.
Order, Senator Colbeck. Time for the answer has expired. Senator Hanson, a supplementary question.
Minister, in light of what your comments there and saying it's new, and I acknowledge that, the fact is that we don't know how often the vaccine is going to have to be administered. Can you give the people any indication of how often that vaccine will have to be administered and at whose cost? So every time it is administered, is that a cost to the taxpayers?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, at this point in time, the government is running a national vaccination program that provides access to a vaccine to every Australian who wants one. That is the program that we're running. And it may very well be that the vaccination program needs to continue for a period of time until we get to the stage where we've, at a global level, dealt with this virus. There are some questions that we don't know the answer to. If you'd spoken to anyone 6 months ago, the concept of the Delta virus and the impact that it's currently having across the world, as you've quite rightly stated in your question, was clearly not understood. The virus continues to mutate. We're not going to understand in advance of its mutations, what those mutations might be, and we have to be prepared to move quickly to adapt to those things as it continues to evolve, Mr. President. So the vaccination program will go for a considerable period of time, and the taxpayer, the government...
Senator Colbeck. Senator Hanson, a final supplementary question.
Well, thank you very much. Well, if we're dealing with the Delta strain now, what is the government's plan of moving forward if this Delta strain changes into another strain? So what is your plan in actually moving forward with that? And can you assure the people that the vaccinations that have been given now, which indicates in Israel they haven't got the same immunity rate, what is your plan to move forward and to deal with the next strain that comes through?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Senator Hanson, for her question. We will continue to follow the latest science in the development of vaccines globally to ensure that we can offer to Australians safe and efficacious vaccines. That's what we've done with the programs that we have underway right now, and we can, as you've heard many times in this chamber, we continue to expand both the volume of each vaccine that we have and the availability of different types of vaccines, Mr. President. And I'm sure that the medical fraternity will continue to do as they've done over the last 18 months, which is continue to research the new variants of the virus as they evolve and as they emerge, and they will continue to adapt the vaccines to deal with those. We are very fortunate in this country right now, Mr. President. We have access to very good vaccines that are safe and provide protection against death, hospitalisation and serious illness.
Senator Faruqi remotely.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Cash. As of yesterday, Fortress Australia has further tightened its borders. Under the strict new rules, even Australian citizens and permanent residents who ordinarily live in another country will need to seek exemptions to leave Australia if they come back temporarily, and could very well be denied the exemption. The changes have been made without warning and have caused anxiety and fear. As it is, 38,000 Australians are still stranded overseas, with many desperate to return home. Minister, why are you inflicting unnecessary pain and further anguish on people who are already separated from their loved ones, and some with seriously sick family members, and who will now be further restricted from coming here because they may not be able to return to the countries that they live in?
The Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Faruqi, you and I are going to have to differ in relation to the government's response, or your opinion of the government's response to keeping Australians safe. Australia's strong border control system has undoubtedly, Mr. President, been a major factor in our success in managing as a country COVID-19, in particular when you look at the global situation. The Morrison government acted swiftly at the commencement of COVID-19 to ensure that Australians remained safe. Mr. President, in relation to the border and travel exemption regime, of course, I think it's without a doubt, the closed border and travel exemption regime are underpinned by a system of quarantine designed to ensure that people returning do not present a threat to the community. In relation to the changes to the outbound travel arrangements that Senator Faruqi refers to, as a government, we have sought unapologetically to take measures that combat the virus whilst also respecting the rights and freedoms of people. The government's pandemic response is consistent with legal and with health advice and is targeted at most effectively protecting Australians from COVID-19. We work closely, Mr. President, as you know, with the states and the territories through National Cabinet to ensure that our COVID-19 response is both measured and appropriate. And in fact, Senator Faruqi, I note that the federal court has consistently found in favour of the government in previous challenges to Australia's border restrictions. Mr. President, in relation to the changes that Senator Faruqi refers to—
Order, Senator Cash. Senator Faruqi, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, we are a nation with close to 30% of the population born overseas and a further 20% who have at least one parent born overseas. Do you accept that these unnecessary and harsh restrictions are hurting tens of thousands and will disproportionately impact people from multicultural backgrounds?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr. President, what I would say to Senator Faruqi is this. COVID-19, Senator Faruqi, affects everybody. I mean, you've seen in the ACT today a 7-day lockdown. It is affecting people in the ACT. It will affect people more broadly. But when it comes to decisions in relation to Australia's borders, it is a fact, Senator Faruqi, that our strong border control system has undoubtedly been a major factor in our success in managing COVID-19. In terms of the changes that you have referred to, as you would be aware, it does not stop Australians who normally reside overseas from leaving Australia. All we have done is remove the automatic exemption. Australians who genuinely reside overseas and are seeking to return to their country of residence, they are still able to do so. But we can't make apologies for our strong border control
a final
system.
supplementary question.
Minister, your government has put in another barrier for people living overseas to come back here because they fear that they won't be able to go back to their place of residence. All this while the rich and the famous, the well-connected and far-right trolls are allowed to swan in and out of Australia. Minister, do you think it's fair that the rich and famous are allowed in while ordinary people are left to suffer in silence?
Senator Cash.
Well, again, Senator Faruqi, I don't agree with the assertions that you have put in place. Anyone who seeks to come into Australia or at this point in time exit Australia, they are decisions that are made by the appropriate authorities in Australia. Mr. President, again, Australia has put in place strong border control systems and they have undoubtedly been a major factor in our success in managing COVID-19. Our role as a government is to keep Australia and Australians safe. That does not mean that every measure is going to be supported by, as you can see here, the Australian Greens. But our role as a government is to keep Australians safe. And in terms of the measures that we have put in place in relation to our strong border control system, they have undoubtedly been a major factor in keeping Australians safe.
Order. Senator Farrell.
Mr. President, my question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator McKenzie. And I refer to the Minister's statements last week in relation to her role in the Community Sports Infrastructure Grants Program. As the former Minister for Sport, did the Minister provide the Health Department with permission to access documents created in her office in relation to the Community Sports Infrastructure Grants Program for the purpose of those documents being provided to the Secretary of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, Mr Philip Gaetjens?
The Minister for Emergency Management, National Recovery and Resilience. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, there's been copious public commentary around sports grants. I have given a 6,000-word submission to the inquiry from this place. I've attended a Senate inquiry. I will let my comments on the public record, which are
Order. Senator McKenzie.
Very exhaustive.
I have Senator Farrell
stand.
on a point of order. Senator Farrell on a point of order.
Well, I was seeking the call while the Minister was still speaking, but it was a very specific question which could have easily had a yes or no answer.
I can't instruct the Minister how to answer a question. If the Minister is referring to a Minister's previous comments, that can be directly relevant. I'm not in a position to judge it otherwise. There is an opportunity, as always, to debate questions after question time, but I can't instruct a Minister the terms in which to answer a question. Senator McKenzie, have you concluded?
Yes.
You have. Senator Farrell, a supplementary question.
Yeah, I do have a further question. Thank you, Mr. President. Based on his analysis of the grants awarded and the list of marginal and targeted seats included in those documents, Mr Gaetjens claims that grants were awarded at a similar rate across other electorates. The minister herself has repeated those claims. Does she still stand by those claims?
Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Thank you, Senator, for your question. I stand by all my public commentary around the sports grants, and I refer you to my previous statements.
Senator Farrell, a final supplementary question.
Look, I do have one. Thank you, Mr President. Well, if that's the case, will she now give permission to the Health Department to provide those documents that I've been referring to the Senate, and if not, why not?
Senator Mackenzie.
Mr President, I have nothing more to add other than my very copious public statements on this matter.
Senator Davey.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is also to the Senator Mackenzie, the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister. Can the Minister please update the Senate on how regional Australians are doing their bit as part of the Australian response to the health and economic challenges through the COVID-19 pandemic?
Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I'd like to thank Senator Davey for her question and her long-standing support for rural and regional New South Wales. We are standing with your communities, especially those in regional New South Wales who have currently been put into lockdown. COVID-19 has been an unprecedented impact not only here in Australia but right across the world. More than 4 million lives have been lost globally, and we're facing the largest global economic shock since the Great Depression. Early and decisive action by our government, in conjunction with state governments, saved 30,000 lives and millions of jobs. We closed our borders, the Prime Minister established the National Cabinet, and we invested over $291 billion in direct assistance to individuals and businesses to reduce the impact. We know these measures have had a significant impact on all Australians, both mentally, socially and financially, and no one knows that better than those that live in rural and regional areas. The ongoing impact of COVID-19 and the stop-start, sporadic nature of lockdowns, especially in regional New South Wales, with Hunter Valley, Tamworth and Armidale just recently being declared Commonwealth hotspots, does take its toll. However, this frustration pales to the difficulties we'd face if we didn't do everything we could to stop the spread. Regional Australians are doing the right thing, lining up in droves, pulling up their sleeves, getting vaccinated, with over 3.7 million Australians in rural and regional Australia getting their jabs. That's increasing day on day, each and every day. Our First Nations people are also rolling up their sleeves, and as of this morning, more than 160,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, nearly 30%, have received at least one dose. Community pharmacies right across the country have kept their doors open, are now playing their role in regional communities rolling out the vaccine. Our government has allocated nearly $48 million.
Senator Mackenzie. Senator Davey, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, how is the Liberal and Nationals government supporting rural and regional communities as we chart our way back from COVID?
Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. Our government has provided a raft of support to regional communities through the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why we're delivering highly targeted financial assistance through the COVID disaster payment to workers who live or work in a Commonwealth-declared hotspot. It's specifically tailored to workers impacted by those lockdowns, and Services Australia has already processed more than 1.8 million COVID disaster payment claims, paying out more than $2 billion to workers to date, and we will not stop standing with individuals as they feel in a very individual way the impact of those lockdowns, and when they're doing the right thing and staying home and stopping the spread. In addition to this, the pandemic leave disaster payment supports those who've been directed by a state official to isolate for more than 14 days. We've also ensured that staff at Meatworks have been identified as a high-priority job role in the first two phases of the vaccine rollout, so that we can actually support our agricultural industries.
Senator Mackenzie. Senator Davey, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, why is regional Australia so critical to the success of our economic recovery post-COVID?
Senator Mackenzie.
Regional Australia is critical to driving our economy post-COVID. We know that agriculture and mining are key industries that stabilise our economic growth. We know that by supporting the agricultural industry, we've supported international freight tasks as supply chains have been challenged by COVID-19, and additionally when our own domestic supply to supermarkets, particularly last year, was challenged. It was by setting up transport arrangements, making sure that we could get food from farm to distribution centre to supermarkets so that Australians who were in lockdown could still access high-quality food. We've negotiated an agricultural visa, which we look to addressing some of those workforce shortages that are as a result of our international border closures. Every single step of the way, our government is supporting Australians in rural and regional Australia to get through this pandemic and to come outside stronger.
Senator McAllister, remotely.
Thanks very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. It's reported the Morrison-Joyce government's COVID-19 information on the Health Department website, which comes in more than 60 languages, has not been updated for almost 8 weeks. Does the Minister agree with the Health Department that failing to update information 8 weeks out of date is, and I quote, a short delay? When will this be fixed?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator McAllister, for the question. Can I say, Mr President, I do agree with Senator McAllister that ensuring that Australians have access to updated information with respect to vaccines and elements of how they might protect themselves from the COVID-19 pandemic through utilisation of a vaccine is extremely important. I would agree with her that it's a very important thing to do. Mr President, that information has in fact been updated. But can I say it should have been updated sooner. It should not have taken 8 weeks. Mr President, the Department of Health understand the perspective of the ministers in the portfolio with respect to that information, Mr President. Mr President, we don't only rely on the Department of Health website for the engagement with CALD communities. This is a very, very important part of ensuring people understand what's available to them with respect of getting a vaccine, Mr President. So in that context, the Arm Yourself TV commercial has been translated into a number of languages and has been running since the 1st of August. There are 20 languages covered in videos of multicultural health professionals, religious and community leaders from Sydney on the importance of staying home, getting tested and getting vaccinated, specifically for the Greater Sydney region. Mr President, there is an established CALD communication working group that was set up at the start of the pandemic. It's chaired by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Michael Kidd, and meets regularly with providing advice both to the Department of Health and back out to communities, Mr President. So communication is extremely important and this information should have been updated sooner.
Senator McAllister, a supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. The Arabic translation on the Morrison-Joyce government's Department of Health website doesn't even mention that adults in Greater Sydney should strongly consider getting any vaccine. Why?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, thank you, Mr President. Thank you to Senator McAllister for the question. Mr President, as I've indicated, the materials on the website have been updated. That is the advice that I've been provided. Mr President, the objective of this government is to ensure and to encourage every Australian who is currently eligible and who becomes eligible to receive a vaccine to have access to the most up-to-date information and to encourage all Australians to get a vaccine. The thing that we do know about the vaccines that we have available in our vaccine strategy at this point in time is that they are safe and they are highly efficacious. They will protect you against death, hospitalisation and serious illness. So we're encouraging everyone to get a vaccine as soon as they possibly can, Mr. President, and that will remain a focus of our campaigns.
Senator McAllister, a final supplementary question.
Thanks. Dr Ken McCrory, a GP in the southwestern Sydney suburb of Campbelltown, said there was a clear link between low vaccination rates and poor public health messaging. He said this: "We are at a serious state of despair with the website being way out of date. Will the Morrison-Joyce government take responsibility for its failure to order vaccines, its failure to distribute vaccines, and its failure to give timely and accurate advice to the millions of Australians languishing in lockdown?"
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, the government has clearly stated on many occasions that it is responsible for the supply and delivery of vaccines to Australians so that they can access a vaccine in a timely way. Mr. President, as I've indicated to the chamber already, the information on that Department of Health website should have been updated in a more timely way. It has been updated now, Mr. President, and we will continue to work with communities across this country through various mechanisms to ensure that Australians have access to high-quality information in a way that they can readily receive it, so that we can continue to encourage them to access the vaccines, because we know the vaccine program is going to be one of the most important ways we work with Australians to come through this COVID-19 pandemic.
Senator Birmingham.
President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
I've received a message from the House of Representatives returning the Family Assistance Legislation Amendment Childcare Subsidy Bill 2021 and informing the Senate that the House has made the amendment to the bill that the Senate requested. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk.
Amend the law relating to family assistance and for related purposes.